Welcome to the Digital Determinants Podcast, where we delve into the complex, systemic reasons behind the presence of digital inequity and the challenges surrounding digital adoption within communities comprising generations from the Great Migration. This podcast will explore the impact of trust on digital participation, the implications of digital discrimination, and the unique challenges faced by descendants of the Great Migration in embracing digital technologies. Join us as we unravel the historical, social, and technological factors contributing to this phenomenon and explore potential solutions to bridge the digital divide and promote inclusive digital adoption. Hey y'all, and welcome back. This is episode 3, titled, Was Chicago CANAAN? Now, there's going to be a lot of religious talk and a lot of faith-based information shared in this episode. So I hope that you stick around to the end, because I promise that even through all of that information that I'm going to communicate, there is a digital equity lesson within the story. So stick with me to the end. So let's talk about the land of Canaan. In the Bible, the land of Canaan refers to the ancient geographical area that God promised to give to Abraham and his descendants. It is not merely the land where the Israelites would live, but the sworn inheritance of God's chosen people. The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. That is from Genesis chapter 17, verse 8. Many African Americans are attracted to the promise of Canaan due to his historical significance and symbolism as land of freedom, opportunity, and equality. So Black folk is holding on to this promise that stated biblically that we were the chosen people. And one could say that because of the challenges that Black people have experienced in this country and elsewhere, really, that this promise of being the chosen people and why there's so much opposition for Black opportunity, that one could say that the Bible potentially is true. It's telling the truth for those who are believers and walkers of faith in that way. So, the biblical reference to Canaan as a promised land resonates deeply with African American community members, symbolizing like hope and liberation and a better future. Throughout history, this narrative of seeking a promised land has been a powerful motivator for African Americans striving for social justice, racial equality, and economic advancement. And if you think about digital equity just as a platform and a philosophy and its tenets, social justice, racial equality, and economic advancement is all up and through there, right? So the Black church, and I'm using Black church holistically, meaning that there's many denominations that make up the Black church, the bodies of the Black church. But for this particular podcast, I'm speaking of the Black church holistically and as inclusively as possible. So the Black church played a significant role during the Great Migration in Chicago, with many traveling from the South in search of this promised land. And it served really as a cornerstone for the African American community as they navigated major adjustments and accommodations. We talked a little bit in episode 2 about how folks got to these migration cities, typically through train or some through water. There had to be some major mode of transportation nearby. And there was a lot happening when people got here. It wasn't like going on vacation. It wasn't like even going to visit maybe a family member in another place. Many folks arrived here with no family, no friends, but held on to a promise of something better. That CANAAN promise, I believe, was a significant driver to give people courage to come to the North. So Black churches in Chicago specifically, that we're going to talk about, saw a transformation due to the influx of Southern migrants, leading to the creation of a new sacred order within the Northern Black Protestant churches. So there was church things happening in the North. But when all of the Southerners came in the waves through those years, there was like a new sacred order. Many things changed here in Chicago, in the faith-based community, generally speaking, but specifically in those areas, geographically speaking, that had the most amount of Black people there. With the influx of new bodies coming into the Chicagoland area, there was also a substantial increase in the congregation sizes of these churches, and they became prominent hubs within the community, doing many things and serving many different needs. That's not too uncommon when you think about many of the other people movements. Churches certainly has occupied the role of being a hub for those who needed support, not only spiritually and emotionally, but certainly getting their physical needs met. Many churches are the homes to pantries and serve hot meals, address the homeless, offer substance abuse support. The churches have that as part of their mission as they coexist in community with people and other businesses. These churches, back in the Great Migration time, provided a sense of belonging, spiritual support, and community cohesion for the newcomers from the South. The Black churches in Chicago served as vital institutions that not only provided that spiritual guidance, but also facilitated social connections, cultural preservation, and a sense of identity during the transformative period of the Great Migration. Because you have to remember that during the Great Migration, there were other things happening. The Great Depression, there was governmental things being stood up and policy starting to emerge. There was certainly housing policy intentionally being put in place that kept Black people in a certain portion of town in Chicago. So there was a lot of things happening when the folks got here that they had to learn how to navigate and understand. So to the point of Black people being segregated to particular pieces of the town, newcomers who arrived to Chicago were directed to the city's south side, where a Black belt was already identifiable by 1900. Most Black residents of Chicago lived within a 19-block strip running from 12th to 31st Streets and 4 blocks wide from Wentworth to Wabash Avenue. So let me repeat that again. The Black Belt, which is where most of the Black people were living, who were already residents of Chicago, and then the folks that came from the Great Migration were all directed to the Black Belt, which was a 19-block strip running from 12th to 31st Streets and 4 blocks wide from Wentworth to Wabash Avenue. If you watched or listened to episode 2, I referenced the significance of the Wabash YMCA and how it has served as an institutional opportunity for growth, training, and housing for those new arrivals who came during the Great Migration. So the Great Migration reinforced this residential concentration and cultural impact of the Black Belt by directing the newcomers to establish patterns of racial and residential segregation. So there was already some movements to keep the people segregated to a certain portion of town in Chicago. And then with the newcomers coming, it just helped to reinforce those racial and residential segregation moments. And to be honest, even in segregation, it provided some comfort because you were around people that looked like you, who spoke like you, who had cultural identity and expressions like you, who had food that was part of your palate and how you obtained nourishment. It wasn't foreign. And so there was some comfort amidst the discomfort in those segregated communities in Chicago during that time. The Black church was thought to be the most important Black-controlled institutions on the South Side of Chicago, meaning they had great power, they had economic opportunity, they were seen as super important. And when we look back around the history of in the civil rights and even in the Great Migration, there was also some planned harm to Black churches to keep them from being powerful, to keep them from organizing, to keep them from informing the people and keeping them armed with information so that they could make better decisions and or protect their families. So the Great Migration altered the religious map of Chicago's African American community. So again, let's just imagine that on your current block, where you live at currently. So on my block, I live on a dead-end street. I would estimate that there's probably around 24 to 30 homes on my block. We know everyone, and when people move out and there are new neighbors that come, we make sure that we know them and know their families. And then all of a sudden, this block with our 24 to 30 houses now have even more occupants on the block, and that there needs to be plans and infrastructure in place to ensure that those people can thrive and can succeed and can work and kids can go to school. It changes the landscape of a geography when that many people come into an area, especially if it's an area that's not as welcoming and an area where they've segregated you to some specific pieces of the town. So you can just imagine how crowded it must have felt, the lack of resources that were available due to systemic discrimination practices. But it still was a place of comfort. It was a place for worship. It was a place for entertainment. It was a place for educational opportunity. It was a place for small business development and entrepreneurship. So it had some benefits, and it's a reason why I believe that there's been very little transition from these areas known as like the Black side of town in Chicago. Because even though people are not comfortable, they are comfortable because there are people that look like them that are there. And at least seeing a friendly face when you are in need feels better than being someplace else with people who may not look like you and may treat you differently or bring some assumptions to the table if you are in need of help. Or if you're just trying to launch something new, maybe you have a new idea or a new opportunity that you would like to explore. It just feels sometimes more comfortable to do it around people that look like you because it feels like a safe space, especially if you're from the South and you've experienced what integrating potentially could mean for you and your family if one thinks you're saying something or doing something wrong. Again, people lost their lives. There was lots of lynchings, lots of homes being set on fire, lots of folks being kidnapped and tortured. There's so much trauma that exists in how Black people maneuver in a social society where they've been made to feel and believe, and there are laws and policies to support, that you are not the same. You should not be treated the same. You are less than a person if your skin is Black and dark or darker, or that you have Black blood running through your veins. And that's just stupid, y'all. I don't have another, expression to support how stupid that is. Like, we're all human. We all bring something unique and wonderful to the table. It's just stupid that people are prejudiced because of how people look, or how people talk, or how people wear their hair, or if they wear bright colors versus blue and gray suits. Like, this world's a funny place for sure. Okay, back to the story. So, the Olivet Baptist Church in Chicago was established in 1850 and served as the mother church of at least 12 Baptist congregations by 1900. So there was a church. There was many churches, so I'm just focusing right now on the Olivet Baptist Church, and I'm doing that for a reason. There's a story that's a-coming. But they were the mother church to start little baby churches, and at least 12 of those new Baptist baby churches came from the Olivet Baptist Church. So by 1902, there was at least 47 Black churches in the Chicago area located within the Black Belt, which started to gain a little bit of expansion momentum because they were already bursting at the seams when the first rounds of folks started to arrive from the South. But they needed more room, so they started to expand a little bit block by block south, a little bit block by block east or west, and there was 47 new churches by 1902, which was a good thing because these Black Southerners were arriving in Chicago and they were looking for places to worship, and they needed places to do that. Olivet was having 3 worship services on Sunday already and opened up his overflow areas, and it still wasn't enough. People had to be turned away on Sunday morning. So just think, it's so many people coming to church that they didn't have no place for the people to sit or to stand. So people had to be turned away once they reached capacity. So they needed more spaces. The churches that they had and the buildings that they were occupying were just not large enough. As the Black Belt started to expand block by block, it was already bursting at the seams because there was so many people coming from the South and coming to Chicago because they heard about the opportunities and they wanted to be here to make better opportunities for themselves and for their families. So as the Black Belt expanded block by block, north, south, east, west, the white congregations and synagogues abandoned the South Side and relocated to escape that expanding Black Belt. So more larger and more prominent buildings in the community that were, again, occupied and owned by white people became available. So Olivet moved from its old location at 27th and Dearborn into the First Baptist building on the southeast corner of the South Parkway and 31st Street. Olivet Church then became the largest African American church and the largest Protestant church in the entire nation. So a relocation exalted this church to being one of the largest Black churches in the nation. Olivet developed a program of progressive social reform, reaching out to the new migrants, the folks coming, saying, hey, we're over here and we got a bigger church for you to come and worship and experience social supports, cultural supports, health-related supports, anything that you need, we got it here at the Olivet. And it provided them with the social service and knitted together this larger, even larger church community. Now, for those who are attendees of church, regardless of your denomination, those churches normally are part of larger conventions or coalitions of churches around the United States and some even globally, right? So in 1915, the National Baptist Convention, of which Olivet was a member, gathered in Chicago's Armory on the South Side and had an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 delegates who came, participated in the convention, and did convention business, but left and carried home news of all the wonderful things happening in Chicago. So from episode 1, we talk about the Chicago Defender newspaper being one of the vital news carriers of information about abundance and prosperity in the North. Episode 2, we talked about the Wabash YMCA having a prominent role in being where new migrants can come and receive services and get some housing support if they needed it. So now we're in 1915, where 15,000 to 20,000 church delegates from all across the United States, but primarily in the southern states, came to Chicago to do the convention and then went back home and told all they people that Chicago is a good place and that folks need to be making their way up north to Chicago. So we have all of these people in a coordinated way of sorts who was influencing migrants coming into the Chicago area. So in 1916, that very next year after the National Baptist Convention, the Reverend Lacey K. Williams became the pastor of the Olivet Baptist Church. Let's talk a little bit about who Lacey K. Williams is.
I would like to introduce you to Reverend Lacey Kirk Williams. He was born on Alabama's Shorter Plantation in 1871 to parents Levi and Elizabeth Williams, who were formerly enslaved there. His family migrated to Texas in 1878, where he attended Bishop College and later Arkansas Baptist College. He became ordained in 1894 at Thankful Baptist Church in Pipridge, Texas. In 1910, he became pastor of Mount Gilead Baptist Church in Fort Worth and soon was elected president of the Texas Baptist State Convention. Williams found himself in Chicago in 1916, pastoring Mount Olivet Baptist Church. The congregation exponentially grew over the next decade, partially due to the great African-American migration from the South to Chicago at the beginning of World War I. Under his leadership, Mount Olivet Baptist Church became one of the largest African-American churches in Chicago and one of the largest Baptist churches in the United States. By the time 1922 rolled around, Reverend Williams was elected president of the National Baptist Convention, but before his election, he started building a publishing house for his denomination in Nashville, Tennessee, which was finally completed in 1925. He was elected president of the World Baptist Alliance in 1928 and received the Herman Foundation Prize for Distinguished Religious Service that same year. Reverend Williams continued to lecture in the Chicago area at various divinity schools, including the University of Chicago, Northwestern University, and the Northern Baptist Theological Seminary. He gave his last address in Birmingham, Alabama at the annual National Baptist Convention just a few weeks before he died on October 29, 1940, in a tragic plane crash.
And in 1919, Reverend Lacey K. Williams was appointed to the Chicago Commissions on Race Relations. And then in 1922, the Reverend Lacey K. Williams became the president of the National Baptist Convention. So we're seeing how important Olivet Baptist Church was to the Great Migration movement in Chicago, and even further how its leadership became the leadership of an even larger congregation, if you will, of other congregations in the National Baptist Convention. So the National Baptist Convention is one of the largest African American religious organizations in the United States. It played a significant role during the Great Migration, particularly in providing support and guidance to the migrants who were relocating from the South to urban centers like Chicago and other places. Moreover, the National Baptist Convention was instrumental in advocating for civil rights and social justice issues that were pertinent to African Americans during the Great Migration. Through its leadership and influence, the convention addressed issues of racial discrimination, economic inequality, and political disenfranchisement, advocating for change and empowerment within the African American community. So the National Baptist Convention had it going on. Like, they were organized in a way that was helpful to advance civil rights issues, social issues, and did that under the umbrella of a faith-based institution. They had power, they had leadership, they had membership that spanned beyond Chicago and other places. And that, to me, is something significant that we should note. That the National Baptist Convention, through its organizational infrastructure, was able to be influential in these migrant communities, using their voices and thought leadership to help Black people. So let's put a pin in that for something later in this episode that I'll talk about. Now, all of the researchers and scholars say that Black churches of the 19th and 20th centuries have played very important roles in Black society outside of the sphere of religion. In a period where discrimination barred Black people from access to various public amenities, many Black churches offered the job training programs, as I've stated earlier in this episode, insurance cooperatives, circulating libraries, and even athletic clubs for folks who wanted to have wellness and be able to participate in sporting kind of events that were not like professional. They were among the only places where Black people could take public or semi-public leadership positions. So think about this. You live in a place where they tell you that your voice doesn't matter and that you have no power, you have no influence. But in the Black churches and the communities of the Black churches, you could have a voice. You could be in a leadership role. You could contribute to conversations and your voice be considered. A lot of times people just want to be heard. It is one of the best ways to get people to participate civically, for people to show up as their best selves and contribute positively, is being heard. And the Black churches provided a place for that to happen. Now, Reverend Lacey K. Williams, again, pastor of the Olivet Baptist Church, had penned an essay in the Chicago Sunday Tribune in 1929. Williams argued that Black churches must respond to the practical and spiritual needs of people struggling to adjust to urban life, that the churches must passionately human but no less divine, as he stated. Reverend Lacey Williams also critically challenged the Black church to be equally concerned about the urgent and vital needs of struggling humanity, as they are with tithing, praying, and preaching. One may say that this call to action may have energized and maybe even gave permission to Black clergy to become even more involved civically and politically. And we have so many stories to point to here in Chicago and other places that includes the intersections of civics, politics, and religion that have directly influenced equity in these great migration recipient cities and has impacted not only those who came over, but also the descendants that are still here. Is that power and influence being galvanized to address digital equity? That's a question for y'all to consider. Is that power that existed in Black churches moved out into the spaces of civics politics? Is it being galvanized to address digital equity today? The answer is yes. I'm going to give it a yes with a little asterisk, okay? So yes, long before the pandemic highlighted and expanded the gulf in internet access between served and unserved or underserved communities, Black churches have been working diligently to identify the needs to connect members of their communities to the internet and sought to provide that connection. Black churches have long provided educational opportunities for adults. We've heard the story earlier in this podcast. And with the advent of the digital era, Black churches quickly realized that computers were necessary to serve this goal. Just think about pre-pandemic, how many churches were on the internet having their services broadcast. In the pandemic era, it made it even more imperative for that to happen so that they could reach their congregations, because we all had our stay-at-home orders and we could not be out and about with each other in the church spaces. Black churches have been among the vanguards in establishing community-directed computer labs for parishioners and members of the public. Faith-based nonprofits have also partnered directly with internet service providers to expand access to the internet. So that's been happening. Some in real coordinated ways, some in less coordinated ways, maybe church by church kind of community by community ways. It's happening. But why is it that our Great Migration recipient cities and its descendants are still some of the greatest communities that are disconnected, the least connected, have the least amount of digital adopters, have the least amount of participants in the internet economy, have the least amount of participants who occupy digital related jobs and career tracks? Why is that? Like, the Black church was at the forefront of helping to bring digital opportunity and digital skill building to help to eliminate the digital divide. But yet our communities still reflect such low connectivity, such low adoptability, such low trust in the internet, and people still should have low trust, because the internet can be a dangerous place, child. I mean, I'm on here right now with y'all, but the internet can be a dangerous place if you don't understand how to protect yourself. So safety and security first, always. But similar to some of those critical reflections that was shared by Reverend Lacey K. Williams, this Williams Tate, also sees that there's some disconnection. Like, what happened? All the power, all the influence, all of the folks who go to church on Sunday and participate in programming throughout the week, all of these pastors with these amazing following. What, where, why, how? I rarely see or hear, and I'm in the space, from our faith-based community around digital equity specifically. I hear about them for other reasons. And certainly I am not trying to tax the church or tax the faith-based communities and institutions with being the only voice that's needed in this digital equity space. We need many more voices, many more hands, many more hearts, many more brains in this space. But I see some disconnection. I feel some disconnection. I don't have ministers beating down my door asking how can they get involved in the movement. Now, some of that just is because Cook County specifically is just a big old place. A lot of churches, a lot of people, a lot of things going on. But I feel the disconnect. And I may be part of that problem, right? I, myself, in my leadership, may be part of the problem and need to workshop solutions around that. And I do have some suggestions around that coming in a minute. So I went and I queried using the good old internet at the National Baptist Convention website. I could not find any references to the digital equity. Now that's a newer concept, so they may not, be using that terminology. But I also queried digital inclusion, digital divide, digital skills, and technology. Those words. And nothing really came up. There was something that came up that talked about a CDC guidance for church around like returning to in-person practice, but nothing really around technology. There was a couple of recommendations of maybe some technical tools that churches could use for live streaming, but nothing like a focus or area, a committee or anything like on the National Baptist Convention. So the National Baptist Convention has approximately 21,000 associated congregations, over 21,000 associated congregations, and they boast membership at 8.4 million members plus, 8.4 million members. Just think about the impact if digital equity became a focus at the National Baptist Convention. National Baptist Convention people, call me. Let's talk about it. I want to talk about it with you. Let me come to the convention. I know I'm not a minister, but I know a couple ministers. I'm related to some ministers. I was raised in the church. I got all the scriptures down. I can fit in. Invite a sister. I'll come. Let's talk about it. And I understand that technology and digital skills and broadband can be large and intimidating topics to address. There are those of us who are in the field who are still trying to navigate and understand it all, right? But I just have to believe that with Black churches, from the storefronts to the mega ministries all over this country, if churches were more civically engaged in digital equity efforts, maybe some of the Great Migration recipient communities may be further along, digitally speaking. Just imagine, if you will, on a church broadcast, that the church broadcasted a digital tip of the week during those church broadcasts. And I watch a lot of church online, so there could be an opportunity for you to drop in a little digital tip of the week for the people, something for them to practice and share generally among the congregation in their communities. I think that would work. Or maybe a section in the printed church programs or in the digital church programs that was dedicated to maybe upcoming digital skills classes or workshops in the community. Or if the church itself added digital skill building to its weekly lineup on programming. Like, I'm a program designer. I like a good pilot program. Can we design a weekly church digital literacy where we're like, walking through the Bible and practicing some digital skills along the way? Like, is there opportunity to do that within our church community, our Black church community? Y'all tell me, is it? We have a strong roadmap to support how impactful the Black church has been in the Great Migration, in the fight for civil rights and other equity movements through time. I think we just need more champions in the Black church to make digital equity a priority. We need to make digital equity church business. As a Black woman, again, who was raised in the church and who has family members and close friends who occupy roles as pastors and evangelists, preachers, teachers, psalmists, praise dancers, you name it. I probably know somebody in some church congregation somewhere. And I know that many a church member would mobilize around digital equity if their church leadership prioritized it. And we have growing momentum through some church movements around digital equity. In May 2021, the Multicultural Media and Telecom Internet Council, or MMTC for short, joined with faith and civil rights leaders to launch BC4DE, or Black Churches for Digital Equity, formerly known as Black Churches for Broadband. It's a coalition dedicated to educating members of our community about broadband internet assistance programs and to advocate for a permanent broadband assistance benefit for low-income Americans. I want to shout out to Dr. Fallon Wilson for her work there and her leadership and her passion, who's helping to drive those organizations to move this advocacy moment around digital equity forward. And in Chicago, we do have some programs like Connected Churches, which is powered through a partnership with Google. Comcast also has worked with a coalition of churches to share information about low assistance subsidized programs for internet access and has done some device donation. But the bottom line is that we need more coordination with Black churches to fight for digital equity. And we have some historical faith-based entities like the National Baptist Convention that's still in existence from the Great Migration and are very much still present in communities across the United States, especially in places like Chicago, Detroit, LA, and these other Great Migration recipient cities that could play a vitally important role in this work. Now, if you heard me talk about digital equity in the past, or just me expressing myself around digital equity, I always talk about being a library kid, and I love libraries, and they're a vitally important player in digital equity in communities. But I'm also a church kid, and churches equally play an important role in advancing digital equity in communities. I think I need to be more intentional with my own voice around Black churches in the outreach efforts for Cook County and the other places and spaces that I occupy. I've had some amazing interactions with the Proviso Township Ministerial Alliance, PT-MAN for short, as well as the Southland Ministerial Health Network. But more is needed. So remember, 20 minutes ago in this podcast, I talked about put a pin in, a recommendation. I think I need to use my voice even more intentionally and do more outreach to Black churches. And I'm challenging you who are listening to this podcast and my voice right now. If you are leading digital equity efforts in your area, it is imperative that you prioritize bringing Black churches to the table and developing specific strategies to address digital equity gaps by providing resources and even developing some pilot programming. This is my first recommendation in this research so far. My first recommendation is prioritizing the Black church in your outreach and engagement and programming and resource acquisition, movement, moment, activity, action plans. Prioritize the Black church. That is my first recommendation. Bing. So speaking of research, there's still so much to unpack here. And to ensure I do the best job with each episode, I need to switch my episode schedule to once monthly. I originally set that I was going to do this podcast twice a month on the 1st and the 15th. but there's just too much information. And I got to account for any kind of technical difficulties that arise, such as in why this podcast is 2 weeks late from when it was supposed to be released on the 1st of July. So I feel like if I move to a monthly format, give you this multimedia interaction and storytelling, that I'll be giving you the best that I got. And that's important to me. I am applying for grants to help to support this research, because right now I have a research team of 4, me, myself, and I, which is 3 people, and then a part-time research assistant that helps to gather clips and helps me to validate the information that I'm sharing. But I need more resources, and more resources will bring more support to the production side of things, and then maybe I'll be able to bring more episodes to you. But until that time, I'm going to stay within a monthly episode release mid-month, so maybe a little bit before the 15th, maybe a little bit after the 15th, depending upon what's happening, and get this podcast out to you. I want to thank all of the people who have tuned in, who've listened, who have watched, who have shared this podcast. I am just overwhelmed with the comments, with the conversations that have occurred as a result of me telling these stories on Digital Determinants. I'm having a good time, y'all, and I hope that you're enjoying this moment with me. Please continue to share. Share in all of your networks. Now, today I'm talking about the Black churches. So if you go to a Black church, or you know somebody that go to a Black church, this the episode. Send this one on, because I am trying to build our digital equity ecosystem. And the only way that we can do that is by reaching as many places and spaces as possible, and doing so in an organized way. So feel free to use this podcast, this episode, or any of the others, as an opportunity to start a conversation around digital equity. Thank you for listening or watching this episode of the Digital Determinants Podcast. I am your host, Kyla Williams Tate, and as always, stay connected.